The readings today are challenging us on an extremely fundamental level to be able to attune inwardly to the voice and guidance of God, and that is not such a simple task. It's far easier to have the path laid out in front of you, to have it defined externally, to know what you're supposed to do or not supposed to do, if that fits you. And then it gets more difficult if you begin to rebel against that and are cursed to go to hell by the people who are in charge of such decisions. It's all very complicated. I was remembering many years ago, Swami Kriyananda has always lived his own life, always lived his life in his own way. He was very powerfully inwardly directed and directed inwardly by the presence of his guru. And so he never paid any attention to cultural trend or fashion or anything like that. In fact, if he ever found himself, as he said, ever being in tune at all with any trend, he would immediately, on purpose, go in another direction, because he had no particular faith in the power of the multitudes to pick out the right attitude. And he also saw himself as leading the generation for generations, leading the age, really, not just tuning into what was happening. So in that context, at some point, some of the teenagers in the community, and this was the time when Michael Jackson was at the absolute apex of his popularity, and some of the children found out that Swamiji had never heard of him and had never heard him, and they felt that this was a serious flaw in his being, so they provided him with some samples of what they thought was his best music, which Swami dutifully listened to. It was sincerely offered to him, and he thought it would only fair to give it a chance. And listening, I don't think he had to listen to very much. He pronounced afterwards, he said, he is a superlative artist. Just from that point of view, Swamiji said he knows exactly what he wants to say, and he expresses it perfectly. And he's perfectly in tune with the times. The vibration of his consciousness and his sense of what it is that people want, he completely understood it, which is why he spoke to the whole planet in such a powerful way. And then Swamiji said, it simply reinforces what I have always known, that I am completely out of tune with this planet. But he admired art, he admired good art where he saw it, even if he didn't like it. And in a real sense, of course, many other things happened to that man because life is a mixed bag, isn't it? But from that particular point of view of being able to find something within himself and then discipline himself in order to do exactly what he set out to do, Swamiji had to admire him. A few days ago, a week or so ago, a group of women, 4 of us, went up to San Francisco to go to a dance concert because the woman who has been the choreographer for our school was putting on a performance. And out of respect and appreciation for her marvelous talent, 4 of us went up to see her dance. And it turned out to be some place where they were having a whole week of featuring various local choreographers, 5 a night. Some were dance troupes, some were individuals, and so we got a random 5. And as we sort of sat down, there was that moment of concern on my part as to what we might have gotten ourselves into. I remembered not too long ago, I went to the daughter of a very good friend, is a local actress, and I went to see one of her performances. And she was very good, and the play was very good. It was really too good. I sat right in the front row. It was too good because in the middle it went anguishing. And all of these people with extremely talented ability were producing all this anguish on stage. And I had made the mistake of sitting in the front row. And so I couldn't close my eyes and cover my ears, which is what I do in movies. And I just had to live through that anguish, which I just didn't feel like I needed to do. So it was good practice to pull inside myself and just let it happen just a few feet away from me and not get drawn into it. Many times over the years, especially when we lived up at Ananda Village many years ago, before there were videos and DVDs and things like that, if we wanted any entertainment, we had to go into town to the movies. And every so often, we would hit it wrong. And we'd be with Swamiji, and you'd see him at a certain point fold his arms like this, and then you'd hear him do a double breath. Like that. You'd look over, and he'd just be sitting like that. And usually soon after that, we'd get to walk out of the movie. We walked out of a lot of movies. But we went to this one that was really horrible. It haunts me to this day. And it was very violent and very sadistic, just everything that I can't bear. And very well done, really good actors. And I just kept waiting for Swami to take us out of there, but he never did. And afterwards he said, sometimes it's good to sit through things like that and just see if you can remain inwardly detached. Well, I flunked with a giant goose egg. In fact, to this day, every time that the thought of that movie comes into my mind, I have to pull myself like this. They did it well. I remember once about another movie, he said, it was well done. Oh, I said, it's worth seeing. I didn't say it was worth seeing, he said. I said it was well done. Two entirely different points. So we were there at this dance concert, and the first one, I keep wanting to say bebop, but the actual word is hip-hop, which had been what I'd been most afraid of, was that there would be hip-hop. So these women come out in various stages of undress, quite comfortable in their various stages of undress, and there were about 5 of them, and the dance was, by any standard, very coarse. No matter how you described it, it was just coarse. There was no way around it. So as Master said, there's lots of things that you can write about, but why? Ramakrishna said you can enter a building from many ways. You can also come in through the sewer, but why would you do that? He said, if you can just walk in the front door. So there were about 5 women, and one of them was considerably heavier than the others. And because they were not wearing a lot, her whole body was on display, and she must have had 30 or 40 pounds on her more than the others. And she was so happy. You just couldn't take your eyes off her. You had these other women who were more conventionally attractive, and they were doing their thing. You didn't care about them at all. This one woman doing this dance that I kept thinking to myself, she dances so well. Why is she doing that? But she did it with such enthusiasm and such sort of joyful abandon that all the rest of it, every so often I had to close my eyes, but for much of it, I was just having a really good time with her. And I just had to say, it was well done. Was it worth doing? That's a matter of opinion, but it was really well done, and it was her. She was being exactly who she was meant to be, and you could just feel that she knew it. And the fact that her body was heavier and she wasn't conventionally beautiful didn't matter at all to her. She was terrific, absolutely terrific. And I was thinking about this whole reality of you have to do your dharma, whatever that dharma might be. I don't know what that woman was balancing. I was trying to sort of watch and think, like, what is she fixing by doing this? What part of her is, what inhibition is being released? What suppression is being overcome? There was in one of the, reincarnational stories, they talked about this woman who'd been a mother superior. This is multiple lifetimes, a mother superior, extremely judgmental. And actually, this was a woman that I knew. And she herself, she was enormously heavy. She indulged in everything. And she ran some kind of, it wasn't quite pornography, but it was somewhere there, some kind of a shop that was all about sexuality and sensuality. And this was what she did. She was also a CPA. She had sort of a complex character. And she said quite simply, she'd had so many incarnations as a judgmental person, as a pastor, as a priest, as a nun, that she'd spent so many lives just judging everyone for everything that they did, that it was the most important thing for her was to just, whatever it was, just let it happen. Just become free. Become free of that. What we're doing in our lives, much more than we realize. When Erica was playing the part of Kamala in the play about Master's disciples, Kamala was a beautiful disciple of Master who met Master when she was just 13 years old, lived a long life, and was very serious on the spiritual path. And when we were younger devotees, we'd always had in our mind that Kamala had prayed to have all her karma come to her in this life. And we used to sort of talk about that, like, does anyone have the nerve to make that prayer? And even in the dialogue that Erica recited on Kamala's behalf, she said, I prayed. She said, maybe I asked over much. Maybe this was not the wisest thing to have done. But it was interesting the way she actually phrased it. She phrased it that she could pay all her karmic debts. And that phrase to me has been a very interesting and an extremely helpful one. If you think of it like this, there is divine law, and there is the inescapability of divine law. That's one of the stages that you have to come to on the spiritual path, where you just recognize that it's inescapable. There's no judgmental God making me do this. It's not a matter of the priest or the dogma or the church or anything. It is the way we are made. Just as we can't, put our hands, we can't take knives and slice our wrists and expect to live. We'll just bleed to death and the body won't be viable anymore. You can't just have someone in your life and just scream at them and scream at them and scream at them and expect them to still want to be with you. It's the way we're made. And after a while, we understand that all of the spiritual teachings in the world, it's not as if they come first and then we try to conform to them. They're discovered. They're discovered by saints and sages over many incarnations who have experiences just as we do and begin to pay attention to two simple questions. Where does suffering come from, and how do I find happiness? And the spiritual path, as Master himself wrote in his first book, which he called The Science of Religion, is just very simple. It's a science. What causes suffering and what brings happiness? And we experiment and experiment and experiment. We try out everything. Master said, in fact, we literally try everything. And that anything that you are convinced will not bring you happiness anymore, it's because you actually tested it out to find out. When I had to go visit our friend Jairam for the first time when he was in prison, many of you know about his life. He's the man who's falsely in jail, but he is in jail for a long time, and we've all been praying for him. And the first time I went to visit him, he was actually, that's how we met. He was in the San Mateo County Jail. This was very at the beginning of what has been his 30-year saga. And the first time I went to visit was the first time I'd ever been into a jail, and it was like a movie set. This very simple scene, and there were bars like this with open cells, and there were bars on either side with people in those bars, and then this aisle down the middle. And it was all men, because I was going into this men's jail. And I walked as close to the center as I could possibly walk. I mean, and the men were in the jail like that, and it was exceedingly boring. And they were in temporary holding places. It wasn't like, these weren't life cells. But you could feel, it was so interesting, because anybody walking down the hall was more entertaining than nothing. They were all standing at the cells, but you could feel their consciousness pushing to get out of those bars. And so their auras were, coming in at me without there being anything wrong with it. They were just pushing to get out of those cells. And it was so fascinating because it was so stark. You could sort of see all of it. You could see that whatever they'd done to get them in there, they were going to do as soon as they got out. It's like nothing had changed. It's like the momentum of their consciousness was exactly the same, but it had been arbitrarily stopped by this physical thing. And they were just going to push out and take drugs or steal things or who knows. I didn't analyze, but I could feel that the consciousness there was moving outward to grab and take. And there was no point of rest. And I thought, well, my own inner reality is a little more subtle. I've never been incarcerated for any reason. I'm going to pause for just a second. Many years ago, in Italy, our work there came under persecution. Somebody filed a lawsuit saying that we had enslaved people and abused them and so on. And under the Italian system, which is largely written against the mafia, they were able to bring our community, according to this man's false lawsuit, under criminal law, not civil law. The end of this story 7 years later was not only were we declared completely innocent, but there's a step further in Italian law that says there was never any basis for this case at all. But it was a divine game that God wanted to play with us. So at 5 a.m. there, this is a very fascinating story that others can tell you more and more detail. I wasn't there. Like 40 armed officers came and arrested a number of people in our community, 9 of them. People you know, Shivani, Kirtani, Anand, and others. And they all went to jail. And Shivani, who's a very powerful person and has had many revolutionary incarnations, just took the whole thing in a wholly different way. She said, she was discussing with the woman who was arresting her how long she might be in jail. She took the woman upstairs to her closet, asking her which of her clothes she would need. Would she be there long enough to need to shampoo her hair? You know, a few things like this. Shivani said afterwards, well, I figured it's the only time in this life I get to go to jail, so I wanted to really do it right. She says like this. And there's one marvelous picture of her being escorted into the jail. Just to finish it off, the woman who greeted them in the woman's side turned out to be someone who'd come out to our place. And when they all walked in, she pronomed to them like that. And somebody from all of that became a serious disciple of Master, somebody they met in the prison. But they were only in for about 8 days, but that was long enough. When there's a picture of Shivani coming in, and she's being escorted by the police, but she's so powerful, it looks like she's leading them in like this. You know, it's all in your magnetism. It's not in what's really going on, it's just what's going on. And she insisted on being called by Madam Lucky. Her last name is Lucky. She wouldn't answer to a number, she wouldn't answer to her first name. I mean, just the whole thing. I think Shivani's been there before. Lots of times. I've been in prison for my beliefs. Such courage. Okay, I'm going back to this jail. And I'm watching these people illustrate violating divine law, which also happens to violate human law. And I felt within myself that I don't look like that. I've got myself organized on a slightly different way. But I could feel the same thing within me. Just this energy pushing against those bars, wishing that I could get out and do this and this and this, but knowing inwardly I was disciplined. I was imprisoned by my own ideas by now, by my own experience, that there's an inescapability to divine law, and it simply must be followed. Of course, it's perfectly easy to transgress it. We do it all the time. And the only thing that happens to us is we get the consequences. That's it. We get the consequences. Now, and if it doesn't happen to come to us in this life, well, it comes to us in another life, just like that. And I think of all the times that I can still relate to them enough when I wanted something and I was able to take it, and maybe it didn't serve others for me to be able to take it, or I wanted to say something and it wasn't really going to be nice. Even just a few minutes ago, we were back in the minister's room and something happened and I interjected right away my opinion like that. And I thought to myself, where does that come from? That constant push to want to just get your way, to make the world be the way you want it to be, instead of just resting in the heart. You know, we may not be in jail anymore, although one of our dear Guru Bhai friends is, for who knows what reasons, because there's karmic debts that have to be paid. And so many things in our lives, they don't work out the way we expect, because we have karmic debts that have to be paid. We're just paying debts. Something happens that we don't like, and I think to myself, well, you know, I got away with this before. I remember once I was falsely accused, truly falsely accused, and all this chaos was coming down on my head. But I didn't defend myself, not merely because of ego detachment, which I didn't have that much of, but because I knew that I was being punished for what I'd done before and gotten away with. Just as simple as that. I'd gotten away with it. I'd had a really good time doing it. Did I think I wasn't going to ever have to pay that debt? Did I really think that I could just violate divine law and scoot through? Just take what I wanted without regard for how it affected others? Just express myself without regard for how it affected people and never have to pay that debt? Of course we do. It all has to come back to zero, actually. It all just has to balance back to the center until we are totally at peace within ourselves. I watched Swamiji for so many years, and I've used this phrase before, but it's still, to me, it communicates. I never saw him rattled. I never saw him agitated by the circumstances of his life. He felt things very deeply. He could be very deeply hurt and touched by things that happened. He could weep for the sufferings of others, but he was never agitated by it. It was just, it would come and it would go. He didn't push against. He was able just to live the life that God had given him with perfect energy, with total commitment, without any fear, without any restraint, without any reluctance. You know, all of us in our lives, we're always looking for our place. And a tremendous amount is made these days, and I'm not sure it's all helpful. But, you know, that woman doing that dance is certainly nothing that I would do, but it was working for her. So I'm not going to say that things are right or wrong. Depends on where you're standing. Wherever you're standing in relation to the center, you have to move toward the center. And literally, people can be going opposite directions in order to get to the center. But we're all moving to the same center. And that center is peace, attunement with God, just riding the waves as our karma comes and goes, whether it's sickness or health or disappointment or fulfillment. It's not like it all has to be misery. Sometimes the debt that gets paid is we're owed big time. We're owed a happy life. You know, Swamiji said sometimes when you see people for whom everything goes well, he said you haven't seen all the incarnations they put in to earn that. And people have different kinds of magnetism. Some people just can make money effortlessly, but they have the magnetism to do that because it's owed to them, because of their former generosity, their hard work, whatever it might have been. And others can work just as hard, and it never comes together for them because everything is having to balance. And this is where the Gita says it's far better to fail at what's really yours to do than to just keep creating more debts for yourself by riding the power that you already have, by skirting ahead of what's owed to you. Who knows? Many different things can happen. So we all have this very interesting project, I was starting to say, of really trying to understand who am I and why was I born. And yes, it's true that we all do have these strangely individualized destinies. You know, that which one has talent for, another has no talent. That which is extremely attractive to one is not at all attractive to another. I was doing the tiniest bit of sewing this morning, and I remembered as a child, my mother had me learn to sew, and I remember learning to embroider when I was really small, making these little hand towels. I don't think these things ever exist anymore. These little hand towels with these little stencils on them and little flowers and donkeys and things like that. And I was just sitting in my room. I've always really enjoyed sewing with my hands. And these thoughts come, you know, all these lifetimes of being those medieval women who were not allowed to do anything but embroidery, you know, or being nuns making the altar cloths or the outfits for the priest. Just why as a child did I learn to embroider? I mean, who learned to embroider? It was just there. It was just part of who I was. And sewing has been integral to my life ever since. It's just something that I do. But these things are trivial compared to the single purpose of our lives. And people torture themselves looking for their purpose. Our purpose is very simple: to experience God in our own lives, to love God, and to share that joy with others. And every other specific is just how best to do that fundamental task. We're here really for one purpose only, which is to understand the inescapability of divine law, to conform to it, and then to recognize that that is the source of our joy. Everything else, Swamiji and I used to call them petty enthusiasms. You have to have something to do while you're learning to love God. You have to raise children or build a great business or learn to dance or whatever it might be. But all of that is for one purpose, which is to move our energy, to give us opportunities to have experiences, and then to learn how to love God, how to receive God in our hearts, how to love God, how to share that with others. Ask that question first. It's so difficult otherwise. What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? Don't ask that question. Say, Lord, how can I love you better? Show me the way to love you more. That's the only Dharma we have. And then if he says, go out like this woman did and let your body get too heavy and then dance with such joy, then be courageous and do it. You know, if he says, no, dear, that's something that you did in the past. Now you need a wholly different life. Then be courageous and do that. You know, there's only two questions. Where does our happiness come from? What causes us suffering? And there's only one answer: harmony, love, and joy in God.